What's up, guys? Coach Jared here with Coach Matt for episode 8 of the Richmond Elite Podcast. Today, we want to go over this concept of whatever it takes. So, a lot of people hear me say that at the gym. It's kind of one of our slogans. And really, all it boils down to is I think a lot of athletes, especially youth athletes, they don't really understand what elite athletes are capable of doing, the type of training that they're willing to do, and what they're willing to kind of sacrifice in order to achieve their goals. So what Coach Matt and I are going to do today is kind of go over what our lives in training looked like when we were at our peak athletic careers. So Coach Matt obviously was a collegiate wrestler. And his training and lifestyle is going to look a little bit different than mine as a Olympic weightlifter. But I think what you'll draw is a lot of similarities from our lifestyles and our focus during that time. So I'll let Matt kind of go through what his life kind of looked like during college.
I mean, it was pretty crazy, especially during college. Obviously, the higher you go up in competition and like the level you go up, the training has to go up, right? And sometimes that's where people get left behind the most, I feel like, is they're playing that catch-up game for a while, and then as soon as they, take a little bit of a break from that, right, they're, a couple steps behind, and then they're a couple steps behind again. So in college, for me, it was, I really adapted, a day-by-day lifestyle, and we've talked about that before, too, and it's just how much can I get out of the singular day that I'm on, right now, and not really focusing about anything else besides that. And for me, it was a little bit different, and honestly, kind of the same for you, but I was making weight every week, right?
Right.
You probably only made weight a couple times a year, I would say, right? Maybe more than that, but for the most part, it was like a cycle of, I'd weigh in on a Saturday, again on Sunday, I'm cutting weight again for Thursday, and then again for Saturday. I mean, it's hard to find a balance between not focusing so much on cutting weight and focusing on actually bettering myself as an athlete, right? And that was where I also had a huge downfall in my coaching career because I was so focused on, the number on the scale rather than what I was actually doing, in the weight room or what I was doing in the wrestling room or whatever that may be. But I would say the biggest thing is 2 workouts a day every day was the thing that I did in college. It was no questions asked. And, now it's funny because sometimes or not sometimes, a lot of the times we hear athletes come in, they're like, well, we had morning practice today and now we're here lifting at, 6 p.m.
Yesterday I was like, hey, why don't you want to do your lower body? Why don't you want to train your lower body today? Well, I squatted this morning at school and I'm like, yeah, so you can't do that twice in a day. You're going to die. Right. As if you're going to, your knees are going to explode if you dared to squat twice in one day.
It's just all in their head, right? It's oh, this is going to be hard again. Well, I thought I already went through a hard, lift.
I always go back to basketball, but you could shoot a basketball in the morning and shoot a basketball at night and you're not going to die. Why can't you do a back squat twice in a day?
Yeah. Right? So that was just it's always funny to hear that now because I'm when I was in college, that was just what happened. I just did 2 workouts a day.
So run through kind of what it when you woke up, and maybe I don't know for you, maybe it wasn't college that you felt like you were in your prime. Maybe it was your senior year of high school. Maybe it was after college when you were training, for MMA or something but kind of when you feel like you were at your best, what did your kind of day look like?
Yeah. So every day would consist of some sort of, cardio, whether it was high intensity or not, right? I would try to get some sort of running, biking, elliptical, anything I possibly could, just kind of get my heart rate up a little bit. So whether that was in the morning or night, it didn't really matter to me. I kind of just depended on what my wrestling schedule was too. But I would say every day I would try to get 30 to 45 minutes of cardio in, as long with stretching or sitting in a sauna and stretching just to, for the recovery aspect. And then usually in the evening we would have actual wrestling practice from about 4 to 5 or 4 to 5:15. And honestly, at that point, once you get to that level in college, it's not necessarily about the teaching aspect of things, right? You're in college wrestling, so a lot of the times we already know the technique. It's more about refining it, right? And then basically just trying to push yourself for an hour. So a lot of our practices, which is funny because high school practices go 2-3 hours.
Because you're teaching technique,
right? Because you're teaching a lot of kids that don't know how to wrestle, how to do certain things, right? But once you get to college, it's like every practice we had was like an hour, maybe an hour 15 at max. It was just get in and work our stuff, and then also try to get our heart rate up in the fact of like live wrestling, right? So usually after practice, it would be the same thing of like recovery, whether it be sauna or it'd be stretching or whatever it may be, and then wake up and kind of repeat that same cycle again. So it wasn't anything too crazy by any means. It's just more so like the grind of it every single day. Wrestling season in college is actually longer than it is in high school, so it's like a 6-month season in college. So it was more so about the consistency of it, is the biggest
So you
thing.
wrestled every day?
Every day.
You ran or did some sort of cardio every day?
Yeah, and there was not a single day, unless I was like dying sick, essentially, that I was taking off. That's just what made my body feel the best. I felt like if I took even, a day off from my active recovery days, it was like the next day I felt like crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like my body was such in a routine of, doing this thing every single week. So, and that was even hard after I graduated, because now it's like, I was training MMA and, still am, but it's like when I had wrestling season and it was a structure, it was just so much easier to like get into that routine and stay in that routine, right? Even during the off season. But then it's like once you don't have a structured sport, like, or like a season or whatever it may be, it's like way harder to stay focused on what you want to do training wise, right? So but yeah, that was basically the majority of it, just putting in the work that was necessary. And if there was extra work that needed to be done, it's just accepting that's your job as an athlete, right? Like it's not really unless you don't want to be a good one.
Would you say that your life though revolved around the sport, or did you kind of like tailor the sport, you know what I'm saying, or your training around your lifestyle?
Yeah, I would say at first wrestling was my life for sure. Like I started at such a young age that I feel like I was so like in love with learning how to wrestle, right? And then like I said, once I got to a certain point to where, there's always something that you can learn, right? But like you kind of refine your skills to what you're good at the older you get. So once I kind of figured out what my base was, then it was like, okay, how can I use my training to like put me to that next level, right? Mm-hmm. So not just focusing on like, hitting so many double legs or single legs or whatever the move is, right? But doing other things that people don't necessarily want to do, right? Like all the hard stuff that people don't want to do. So I'd say that was the biggest like switch. And that probably came, I would say, right after high school. Like even in high school, I wasn't, I was a 106 senior. I wasn't necessarily in the weight room all the time lifting or like doing the necessary things I needed to do outside of wrestling. I was just very, very good at technique, and I'm very, very good at wrestling. Like that was just what it was, and that's how I beat people. Once I got to college and I started wrestling like actual grown adults, and I was undersized and everything like that, that's when I kind of realized that, there's extra work that needs to be done, even sometimes if you can't accept that, like you kind of think that you have it all figured out until you don't. And that's what college was. It's just like a rude awakening. You get your ass beat a little bit.
It's like, I guess, was it like school first for you in college, or was it like wrestling first?
I was wrestling. I mean, that's honestly, I tell my parents all the time, like, if it wasn't for wrestling, I probably wouldn't have been in college. I probably would have just done something else, Like I wasn't a guy that wanted to go to like an Iowa or like a state school and like go there and just, party and hang out and just do that. Like that just wasn't who I was. And I was competitive my whole life. So I'm not sure what I would have done if I didn't have wrestling in college, but I just know I probably wouldn't have been, just going to school just cause. So
yeah. I know I didn't. My college experience was not like most people's. I did not party at all because I was training so much. Yeah. And like the thing was, my life was so revolved around training that, and I was training so much that like I felt like if I went out and partied, like I was going to take away from that. And it was like that was the hard part, and that's. Yeah. It kind of goes to like some of the nutrition stuff that we see with our athletes, and then like even just lifestyle stuff where maybe they are going out and partying, and it's like, dude, you're doing the hard work. Like this is the hard part, right? At the end of the day, like what we do is the hard part. It's like to me that's the easy part, like the eating right. That's like it doesn't take any physical, effort
it's just a choice
eat.
To do it.
Right,
Yeah.
it's a choice, right? It's
Absolutely.
the same thing to not go party. So for me, it was like, dude, I'm not going to put in this amount of physical effort and then like waste it by making like a poor decision.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like it's always weird to me. I know it's probably different being like a D1 athlete. Like I see all these D1 football players, like they go crazy, right? Like being in a big location with like a lot of money now, especially, so it's just weird. But in the fact of like my career, when I even wrestling at a D3 school, we were, a top ranked team in the country. I felt like there was a target and eyes on my back like constantly too. So like going out, I mean, Dubuque, Iowa was a smaller city anyway. So it's like everybody knew Loris wrestlers and knew who we were and stuff like that. So it has to be the same for, Alabama football players or, they know who they are. But I just felt like such an anxiety and target on my back when I like would do those things, even in the off season, like if I would go out with my friends or something like that. But it's just like, I don't know how you can even think about risking that when there's just so many people who know who you are and like know what you do. And it's just, yeah. So I never really got into that stuff.
And I know there's people like, there's a lot of people out there that partied hard and they're great athletes. Right. Yep. And I just think it's hard to argue that they wouldn't be even better if they maybe were more focused. And I think you even see this, like, I'm a huge Bears fan. We're both huge Bears fans, right? And like, I listen to a lot of the interviews, and lately, like, the team's been struggling. And like Cole Kmet, and I think a couple other guys have said that, like, there's some guys on the team that they don't, like, they're not just like focused on football all the time. Right. They're maybe doing, like, they're just like not putting in the work in the weight room. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. And now it's like, okay, well, they're in the NFL. Like, but the point is, like, there's levels to this, right? And the top guys, and really what you should be doing is you should try to be maximizing your potential, right? Your genetic potential. And, that could be D1, that could be D3, that could be, professional. Yeah. But the point is like, there's guys in the NFL even that aren't maximizing their potential because they're making choices, outside of football to, just not maybe prepare with the most amount of film they could be, or, they're not spending enough time in the weight room. They're not eating correctly. They're not doing all those things. So at the end of the day, yeah, they're in the NFL, but you can't, it's hard to argue that they couldn't be even better. Yeah, if they were to do all those other little things, right?
Definitely. I think just as an athlete in general, like even before those guys made it big, I guarantee you they sat down one day and they wrote down, okay, like what's important to me in my career and what's not, right? Like at some point as an athlete, you need to sit down and, it's almost like a pros and cons list for your career, but it's, what do you value out of your career and what do you not, right? And that's, what I did too when I was wrestling. It was a big difference of what I valued and what I did not, and I think that's what drove me away from partying and doing all that stuff, right? And I think it also like helps that even in high school, like people around me were exposed to that, or people around me were doing that, but it was just like making the choice not to do it then, and because a lot of times it does start like at the high school level, and especially now, like parties are a huge thing at the high school level now, and even bigger than they were when I was in high school. Yeah, it's crazy. So it's a lot more, there are a lot more exposure to alcohol for kids or for partying for kids now. So, but yeah, it's just as an athlete, it's like like I said, what you value and what you find is important and what you want to accomplish, right? All those things have to align. Otherwise, that path is going to go somewhere else all the time. So,
right. Yeah. So I'll go through kind of what my training looked like. So I would say my prime was kind of like probably my junior, senior year of college, and then maybe a couple of years after college too. But really it was funny when it came to college, I scheduled everything with weightlifting in mind. So like when I would schedule my classes, I would ensure that I had adequate breaks in between classes, or that like, maybe in the morning, I didn't start class till, let's say if I didn't start class till 9 or 10, then I had time in the morning to get like some training in. Now I would say in college, I trained a minimum of 4 hours a day. So that was probably either most of the time I'd say that was probably two sessions, and maybe it wasn't 2-hour sessions. It might be more of like a 3-hour session, and then like one where I came back in and did some accessory work or something like that. Right. But it was a minimum of 4 hours of training. I'd say most days. Saturdays I would go and I would train at a weightlifting club kind of out of the city. So that one I maybe wasn't training quite as long because I had some drive time. And then that was a day where we would just kind of go heavy, and it was more of like a fun day. Yeah. But yeah, no, I'd say minimum 4 hours a day training, which it sounds crazy to a lot of people, but the better you get at something, the more work you have to put in to continue to get better.
Yeah,
right. And
sure.
so like, if you look at how you get better at something, or you do something essentially that you've never done before.
Yep.
Right. And then your body adapts to that. Right. And the adaptation process is what makes you better. Right. That's like conditioning, that's strength training, anything. It's like you push yourself a little bit further than you've pushed yourself before. Mm-hmm. And then your brain's like, hey, he's probably going to do that to me again someday. Well, the point is, if you, let's say, the first time I ever squatted 100 pounds, my brain was like, oh, that was really hard. He's probably going to do that to me again someday. I got to make myself stronger. Well, the next time I went to squat 100 pounds, my brain was like, okay, we were a little bit more prepared for this. We still maybe need to get a little bit stronger, but not as much as the last time, right? And so if I just kept squatting 100 pounds over and over again, eventually my body's fully adapted to that. And there's no reason for it to continue to adapt and continue to get stronger. So eventually, instead of squatting 100 pounds, I had to squat 110 pounds, right? And then, and so on, right? Mm-hmm. And so anyways, and here's the thing. So like wrestling and sports like basketball and football and baseball and all these, there's more skill. I don't know. It's hard to say because weightlifting is extremely skilled too. Mm-hmm. But the point I'm getting at is like so weightlifting is essentially like skill in the movements. So skill in the snatch and clean and jerk, and then strength. Those are like the two factors, right? Mm-hmm. Strength is less important, although it's very important. It's less important in sports that have higher degrees of skill.
I was going to say like
right?
There's always like, the bodybuilders that we're talking like MMA fighters or jiu-jitsu guys, right? And they're like, I'm strong, I'm 260, 250, right? And then you see like this jiu-jitsu girl or guy that's like 150 pounds, they'll just launch them on their head like that, right? Like it's all technique at that point, right?
So like ping pong, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's like, that's probably like 99% skill, 1% strength, right? Mm-hmm. Or stamina is probably like, we can put like strength conditioning into that, right? Then you have like golf is probably, up pretty high on the skill level spectrum, right? Mm. But you are seeing a lot of golfers now that are way stronger, right? And because hitting the ball far is super important, right? And so anyways, each sport has its own kind of skill to strength ratio. And my sport just so happened to have like a very high like strength portion of it. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm getting at is like, it really came down to like, once your skill is kind of maxed out, which it kind of can be at some point, is like, I always say like, if you're a Navy SEAL and you hit the bullseye 10 out of 10 times, it's like, dude, I don't know how much better you want me to get. Like if I make 100 out of 100 free throws, like, I'm kind of spinning my wheels if all I'm doing is shooting free throws. Right. Yep. So the point is all I could do was get stronger, and that takes time. It takes effort. So, like I said, 4 hours a day of training, my nutrition, not necessarily like it depended on the time of the year, right? But like the biggest thing was that my nutrition was always had my goals in mind, and meaning like there was times where I was drinking a gallon of milk a day. Yeah, like it's crazy, and like eating kind of like obscene amounts of food. Yeah, because I was training so much. Like you've heard like the Michael Phelps stories, right, and stuff like that. So, kind of similar to those things. You can ask my wife Becca. Like our grocery bill was way more expensive in college than what you think what it should be, right? Right. And so we continue, that was part of it. And then the last thing would be just like when I would look, so I coached myself for the first, few years of my career, and really I didn't know, I didn't know what I was doing. So what I would do is I'd go on the internet and I would like type in like the hardest like squat program, like the world's hardest squat program. And again, like not the smartest thing to do, because there's definitely better ways about this. But I think the mindset that I had is kind of what got me there, is saying, okay, well, I should do the hardest program out there because that's going to get the best results. Right. Yep. And, or it was, hey, most people probably aren't doing this program, so if I do it, like I'm going to be better than them. Yep. So I think that's the biggest thing that I see with youth athletes is they don't understand that if you want to be better than everybody else, you have to do the things that other people aren't willing to do. Right. Yeah. And it's the boring stuff, right? Like you said, I mean, you've talked about it before, but it's like for your,
your sport, you did these lifts every single day, right? And it was
Every single day.
every single day of your life, you were worried about these three things, you know. And wrestling, the same thing. You go in and you work these moves, you know. It might be different moves every single day, but you still got to wrestle every single day, and it gets boring to wrestle your friend and your partner, you know, 24/7. But like you said, the master of the mundane, the master of the boring stuff, that's like the biggest thing. And my assistant coach was huge on that. Like, do the mundane, boring stuff, because that's what's going to separate you from a lot of people, and especially at the highest level, right? People get so caught up in trying to find the next trend for training as well, that if you just stick with like the basic, boring stuff that you've been doing, right, that got you there, that's been working forever, like that's what's going to keep separating you from everybody else.
And so I think that's a big thing, is that when you start hitting a plateau in training, most people look to do something different. When in reality, they probably just need to do what they're doing, but do it more.
Right. Do a higher intensity of it, or just try to
Exactly,
find
more volume,
yeah.
right? So like for me, again, it wasn't like, okay, my squats hit a plateau, I'm going to stop squatting and start doing leg press, I'm just going to do more squats now.
Yeah.
And then I did more squats, and my squat went up, and then it stopped eventually. And then I did more squats, and it went up, and then it stopped eventually. And then I did more squats, right?
Right.
And so that's a huge one, I think, is that everybody, because what they're doing, and they don't realize that they're doing this, but they're essentially trying to put in the same amount of effort that they were putting in before, because they're only willing to put in, you know, let's say I train for 1 hour a day. That's like a lot of people. They have this mindset of like, I train for 1 hour a day, which again, that's great for most people. This podcast is about whatever it takes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And there was a time where I couldn't fit the amount of training that I needed to train to get better in 1 hour a day. It wasn't like logistically possible. So my training had to take longer than that. And eventually, again, it got up to the point where, you know, it was 4 hours a day of training. Yeah. Right. And so, and that's just, it's what it took. It's what it took for me to get better at one point. And eventually for me, I would have trained 8 hours a day if that's what it took. For me, it came down to the amount that I had to train to get better started coming up on the line of how much I could train and not get hurt.
Yeah.
And not like, you know,
push yourself too far
and not get injured.
Yeah.
Well, right. So I think that's what so a lot of people wonder, like, when somebody says this is your genetic limit, right? This is kind of, and I don't necessarily have like I don't have a great definition for that. I think there's some other factors that come into this, and I don't know if there's a true genetic limit for everybody. But I think the best way to describe it is, you know, the amount of training that your body can tolerate without getting injured. That's like kind of your genetic limit, right? And that can, like, that builds up over time, right? It wasn't like if I trained 4 hours a day right away, I would have died. I would have got injured right away. So I had to build a capacity. But I think eventually at some point, especially just with other lifestyle factors, like once I graduated college, I had to start working, right? And, between work stress and life stress, right? Like, I always say training doesn't happen inside of a vacuum, right? Meaning like you can't ignore the other life factors that you have going on when it comes to your training. I think that's what's important about having a coach like us, is that, we're going to ask the athletes, how are they doing? You know, what's going on in their lives, right? We're going to talk about that kind of thing, those kinds of things, because those are important to determine how hard we need to push them on a given day, right? Yep. Stress is stress. You know, your body, I don't think, has a very good way of differentiating between different stressors, right? And so anyways, in college, for me, again, life was not very stressful in the grand scheme of things, right? I might have thought it was back then, but like now it's like,
that's what I was thinking about. I'm like, man, if I could just go back, like live at my parents' house, not to do anything, and just like wrestle, and that's it, and work out for, I mean, that's just,
and that's the thing is like, okay, well, in college, I went to class, and I got good grades, I did well. But that came relative, like I didn't have to work super hard at that. But training was first. I never, it was funny. I had a lot of kids that would, they would be like, I'd be like, hey, why aren't you at the gym today? And they'd be like, oh, it's finals week, dude. I'm studying.
You're like, who cares? Yeah.
Like, you can study after your, I actually thought finals week was easier because you didn't have all the classes. Like it was actually like less, it was more time to train.
Yep.
right? But it was like, for me, it was, my life was built around the training. The training was first, and then everything else came around the training. Like if I had if I had to train that day, like if, I don't know, if I had a baby shower I had to go to or something like that, like I would get the training in, before I had to go, or I would get it in after. Like it wasn't an option.
Yeah,
I think
you just knew it was gonna. It was just part of who you were.
Yeah, I might have to do, again, whatever it takes. I might have had to do it earlier than what I wanted to do. I might have had to do it later than what I wanted to, or I might have had to just tell the people that asked me to go to the baby shower that I'm not going to go.
Right. Yeah.
And that's like, again, that's what it took.
Yep.
And I think that's what, like, people think of those things as being unrealistic or
I almost think people think that it's like, oh, he's like, thinks he's just better than everybody else because he doesn't do it. It's like, no, I only got one athletic career, right? You have this short period of time to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Like, if you really care about it enough, people are going to go on the back burner, and the people that are on the back burner are probably going to understand. And if they do, obviously you want them a part of that process. And if they don't, then you probably should just kind of push them to the side a little bit, right? So
it's like there's social norms. And if you want to be like everybody else, if you want to be normal, then abide by the social norms, right? Train an hour a day. Go to all the events you're invited to. Skip the training when life calls. If you don't want to be normal, then you have to do abnormal things. And I think that's like, again, I'm not advocating for this for most people. I just want people to understand that you're capable of way more than what you realize. Yeah. You are deciding, it goes back to a decision, that you're going to skip training that day, right? And that's okay. Like, it's okay to make these decisions. I just want people to know you're also capable of making a decision to not do that.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you're not going to do it, you should just be real with yourself. Like, you have to be honest with yourself and about your career. And if you wake up and you're like, I'm just not going to train today. Right. Then that's fine. But like, just admit to that. Don't be like, well, it's because I got to go to a baby shower or because I got a lot of homework. It's like, dude, when I had a lot of homework, I would want to work out even more because it took my mind off of that stuff. Right. Like that stress of homework and doing everything else, like I would go clear my mind for an hour or whatever it may be working out, and that's, some people, they just are like, use that as the, excuse to not work out.
I think most people are trying to justify things to themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. It's like, I don't really want to work out today. How can, and again, I don't think a lot of these things are conscious. Like, I don't think these are conscious, like, things that people are trying to do. I think this just is how our brain works. And I think a lot of times our brain is trying to, obviously make us not be mad at ourselves. Right. So it's like, I really don't want to work out today. How can I justify to myself that it's okay to not work out today, right? For sure. And like I said, that's fine. It's just, I want people to understand that if you want to be better than everybody else, you probably gonna have to do things that they aren't willing to do, right? Because I always hear, well, so-and-so doesn't do this or so-and-so doesn't do this. It's like, well, do you want to be like them? Yeah, right. Right? Or, it's like, he doesn't train in season. I'm like, yeah, like most of my teammates don't train in season. I'm like, yeah, do you want to be better than them or do you want to be the same as them? Right. It's like, or there's just so many factors, and it's really important for athletes to understand that you cannot do what everybody else does and expect a different result.
Yeah, for sure. And I think going back to even when you were in college, I guess, when you were training, especially at first, I feel like you had even more than 4 hours of training a day because you were coaching yourself. So like you were doing two roles, you know what I mean? Like you still had to probably program for yourself. You had to teach yourself how to do certain things still, right? Plus like be on the athlete side and train as hard as you possibly could while also trying to coach yourself. Like it's hard. Like even when we're making videos, like technique videos, and you're trying to do, a movement while talking, like to yourself, even, it's impossible, right? Like you can't really focus on anything else. So it's like,
but that's all I cared about.
Yeah, it's so crazy to me that you're able to like train at that intensity, right? And then also coach yourself at the same time because, it's just like it was brand new essentially to you at the same time.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know why. I for whatever reason, that's all I cared about for many years. You can ask my wife. Like, we should get her on here sometime and like just kind of explain.
I'm sure
to you.
Becca would have some stories.
Oh my God, I'm a nutcase, man. But like, just all I cared about, I literally would get home from class or training or whatever, and then I would just start writing programs. And like, I just would write programs, not even for me, just in general, I would write programs, and like, I would just love to like tweak them and see how they looked. And then I would have people run them and try them and see if they worked. That's cool. And, I think a lot of times though, it was just like the program probably just got the people that I gave them to start training more. It's like, oh, I'm going to do what Jared says. Oh, this is more than what I've been doing. Right. And that's probably where half the results came in. Right. So yeah, anyways, that's all I cared about. And I think, again, I just think people need to understand that, like, there's levels to this. I think I saw like a video the other day. I need to share it. His name's Patrick Bet David. He's like a business guy. But he said there's like 3 types of people. There's people who are, I think there's people who are interested in something. There are people that are dedicated to something. And then there's people that are obsessed with something, right? There's like kind of those 3 levels. Yeah. And he talks about how his kid plays soccer, and he's good. He's on a really good like travel team, but he said they went to a game or a tournament, and this team just smoked them. And he's like, dude, these kids are crazy. Yeah. Like, they were so good. And he's like, he saw one of the parents of the other team, and he was like, why are your kids so, like, what do you guys do? And he's like, he said, like, we practice, for, I want to say it was like 4 hours every day. Like, we have morning like this. We do, like, we have, like, their lives were revolved around soccer. And he goes, well, what place did you guys get in the nation last year? And he said first. Like, we won the national championship, and it made sense because like they were obsessed with soccer. Like, they were obsessed with it. Like, that was like and then there's like, he's like, my son is dedicated. Like, they practice, every day. He's not thinking about soccer at all times of the day, but when it is time to play,
that's a big thing. I think that's a huge part of like athletics as you get older, is just not hyper fixating on only your sport, because you just like drive yourself crazy. Like, I used to drive myself insane in high school about wrestling, because I would, look at rankings, and then I'd look at, who the number 1 guy beat, and then who I beat, right? All that stuff. It's like,
but you were there at one point, and I think a lot of people, I think we can both, and again, like right now, I would say you shouldn't probably do what I was doing, right? You shouldn't. There's a lot of things you shouldn't do. But I think more people need to do that, or need to at least try that or go down that path, than people who need to dial things back. And same thing, like what you're about to say is like, hey, people need to be less maybe obsessed with their sport, and be able to like turn it off, turn it on. And again, that's easy for you to say in hindsight. But if you didn't go through that period, you probably wouldn't be where you're at now. Right. And same thing with me. Like, I was obsessed with the sport. Right. And it's like, again, now I think it probably would be better if I could compartmentalize it. Right. Or could have, and just said, hey, okay, when I'm training. But when I'm not, I'm spending time with my family. I'm doing this. I'm working on school, whatever. But I think people should try getting obsessed first. And see, like, cause I don't think most people are going to get too good at their thing without getting obsessed. And then afterwards, like, learning how to compartmentalize.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Yeah, because like, looking back when we were younger, whatever we were playing, I was definitely obsessed with, right? Like, I eventually fell in love with wrestling, not at first, but I eventually fell in love with it. And same with like baseball for me, right? Like, I was obsessed with playing baseball. And but yeah, it's like, as you get older, you realize like there's other aspects to your life that you have to focus on a little bit, right? And like, unfortunately, it doesn't just all revolve around wrestling or evolve around weightlifting or your sport. So, and we still try to make it that way, like you said, but yeah, it's just like other factors start to come in where, you're on your own in college. You have to actually take care of yourself a little bit more, right? You don't have your parents to rely on as much. But yeah, so that is very true. You definitely have to go through the obsession process and get like you have to be crazy at some point if you want to be like at the top. You have to be like a little bit.
You have to be different.
You have to be mentally just a little bit off. Like, it's just like,
we talk about the UFC guys, right?
Yeah,
like they are definitely.
They're just mentally off a little bit. My coach always, he always said like, dude, you gave up being normal so long ago. He's like, when you started wrestling, you just gave up being normal, and that's it. Like,
why does everybody want to be normal though? I think that's
it.
Like that's kind of what we're getting at with this, is like, whatever it takes is not normal. Right. Like, it's not normal to just be willing to do whatever it takes to win, right? Like, what's normal is like, oh, like, it's going to take 4 hours of your life every day to win. that's not realistic.
Yeah.
That's not normal. I'm not
That's
going to
crazy,
do that.
right?
That's
People say it's
crazy.
crazy,
That's
yeah.
and it kind of is crazy. But guess what? It's like it's what it takes. So at the end of the day, that was never like I think most people they put boundaries. I think the same thing with business, right? Like there's a lot of people that set boundaries and on themselves, and they say, I'm not going to answer my phone on the weekends. I'm not going to, show up at a certain time to meet a client in the morning. Like I'm not going to get up at 3 or 4 a.m. to meet a client. I'm not going to stay until 8 or 9 to meet a client, right? And they set these boundaries, and that's fine. And that, again, that's probably good for certain parts of your life. And what I'm finding is I'm able to set more boundaries now later on in business a little bit, but I had to go through the period, and I still am there a little bit, where I didn't have any boundaries and I just did whatever it took. Right. So I showed up whenever I had to show up. Right. And I stayed until whenever I had to stay. And I still do this more than I should, but I answer phone calls on the, when I'm out to dinner, literally I'd be like out to dinner with my wife. Hi, this is Jared from Richmond Elite Performance. How can I help? And then like, literally it was like, they were like, hey, can I come check out the gym? And I'm like, yeah. When were you wanting to meet? They're like, could you be there in 10 minutes? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Check, please. You know, get the check, pay, go to the gym, try to like show them the gym, see if they'll sign up. Right. Like I've done that.
Yeah.
So again, I know that's business related, but it goes back to a lot of people wouldn't do that.
Right. That's just your values that you've learned from your career.
I just want to win.
Yeah. You just want to be the best at whatever you're doing. Yeah. That's just part of it.
Okay, so that I think we should wrap it up, but I think that kind of goes to my last thing is like everybody's competitive when it comes game time, but they aren't competitive in their training.
Yeah.
Right. Like a lot of people. So like when I told you, like I would go on the internet and I would find like, so there's a famous squat program called Smolov. I think I've told a lot of people about this, but it's pretty well known in the fitness community. And I just literally like go on the internet, I'm like hardest squat program, and it found this program called Smolov, and I just was like, I'll just run this. And they say you're supposed to run it like one time because it's like super high volume, super like you squat 4 times per week, and it's like super high volume every day. And they're like, you're supposed to run it like one time, and then like, maybe don't run it again for a long time. It's like, it's not meant to be like in perpetuity. I just ran it like in perpetuity, just like, it was like a 4-week cycle that I just ran every 4 weeks. Right. But the point was I was competitive in my program selection, or when I would write my own programs, like when I started coaching myself, I would try to write the hardest program. And that was part of being competitive, was I'm going to work harder than everybody else. Like that was part of being competitive. Instead of like, I'm going to win the competition, it was like, I wanted to win the training too. And winning the training for me was by training harder than them. So like when I write this program, I want to write a harder program than you. That's again, that I'm just saying that goes back to my competitiveness. Right. And I think, I don't know about you, but I feel like I see a lot of athletes who, again, they say they're super competitive. And when it comes to competition time, like when you're getting them on the court or on the field or on the mat, like they're super competitive. But then when it comes to training, they're like not as competitive. Yeah,
they're not able to flip that switch for both areas, right? Like, just like you said on the competition side, they can flip that switch. But then when they're in here, it's like, it's almost like they feel like they're more relaxed. And when I was training, I felt like even more anxious than I did when I was competing sometimes, right? Yeah. Competing is the fun part for me, right? I had fun competing, but practice is like, there's so many things going on. You're, all the eyes are on you from your coaches. You're around your teammates, right? You're wrestling the same person all the time or competing against the same person. Sometimes you're competing for a spot on a varsity lineup, right? Like, so it's a lot more stresses that go into it for sure. So yeah, I definitely get what you're saying.
At the end of the day, this is me, I'm crazy. Again, I don't have all my screws tightened, but like I want to beat you in every way. Like when I see another person, like, and this is not in like I still love you, whoever I'm talking to, right? Like I still want to be your friend, but I want to be a harder worker than you. I want to be in better shape than you, right? I just want to beat you in every way. Like that's the way my brain works, right? And so what I'm getting at is like, a lot of people, it's like, I guarantee you, Michael Jordan, right, or whoever else, they wanted to beat whoever it was in every way possible. we have a lot of athletes that, like, again, they want to beat everybody on the basketball court, but then when it comes to training, they don't always want to beat everybody else. They don't care to beat everybody else, right? And or it's like, so I don't understand. Like, to me, I just don't understand that. Like, if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna try to be the best at it, right? And so when it comes to training, I'm gonna try to like, I want to train harder than all you guys, because that's to me, that's beating you. Like, I want to beat you in training, right? And I don't know. That's what I see as the top athletes. They're just so damn competitive that they want to win, not only in the competitions, but they want to win in training too. For
sure. I agree 100%. I think, I mean, that's just how you train to beat the best, right? It's like a cliche saying, you train to be the best or beat the best, but it's, I mean, that's how you have to train. You just can't really like sacrifice your training and think like, okay, I'm going to get the results that I want, right? Or like, I can't put it on the back burner a little bit and expect to achieve the same things that I achieved before, right? Like, even if you had success and you're thinking like, okay, I won state, or I, was all state, or whatever it was, like, now I can just do that same thing again the next year for the next off season and get the same results. It's like, no, because now people are chasing you, right? Now competitive people who are around you are chasing you. So you have to elevate yourself, right? Like, now that target's on your back. And I think that's a big thing, is like, once people get success, they think they can take that time off, and it's like no,
grow or die, right? Like, you're either going up or you're going down, right? So
absolutely.
All right, man. Well, let's wrap this up. Thanks again for tuning in. Episode 8 of the Richmond Elite Podcast. This was a fun one. We just wanted to do another one with Coach Matt. We'll do a lot of these just between us coaches, and kind of go through some of our training thoughts and philosophies, because we got to get it out there, right? Like, we got these things that we think about when we're training athletes, and for me, I know at least it's like helpful to like be able to kind of get out all these things that I'm like angry about or like thinking about. So anyways, we'll catch you guys next time.
The Bears.